Join us in a festival that promises to be extraordinary, because Bali is extraordinary.
Hi everyone, welcome to Ubud Writers and Readers Festival 2021. This year, the festival returns with the theme Mulat Sarira, or self-reflection, which is drawn from a Balinese Hindu philosophy. From the 8th to the 17th of October, we will explore the meaning of self-reflection, cultural introspection, and human rights, examining who we are, what unites and divides us, and what drives our actions. I'm Amanda Katiliniode, Director of the Climate Reality Project Indonesia, part of a global organization with a mission to catalyze a global solution to the climate crisis by making urgent action a necessity across every sector of society. I'm also an executive coach, mentor, and trainer on climate and sustainability actions. Today, we have Mark Lynas, the author of 6 books on the environment, and I'm sure the number is still counting. His latest is Our Final Warning, 6 Degrees of Climate Emergency, that we will discuss today. He also advised former Maldives President Mohamed Nasheed on climate and works with the 48-member Climate Vulnerable Forum. Mark has written for numerous publications, including the New York Times, the Washington Post, the Wall Street Journal, the Guardian, and CNN.com. Mark, thank you for joining us from the UK.
It's a pleasure to be with you, Amanda. Hello, how are you?
Hi, so glad we have you at the Ubud Writers and Readers Festival. Our Final Warning is an update of your 2007 book, 6 Degrees, Our Future on a Hotter Planet, that has been translated into 22 languages with rave reviews and adapted into a documentary broadcast on the National Geographic Channel. You work on Our Final Warning for 3 years, or maybe more, combed through thousands of scientific publications, and detailed the likely consequences each degree in temperature change above pre-industrial level has on the world. If you can just say it in a few sentences, what is actually your main message? In other words, what are the takeaways from the book? And why 6 degrees, Mark? Why not stop, for example, or 3 or at 5 degrees, for example?
Right, thanks, Amanda, for that question. So the original 6 degrees concept dates back to 2007. As you mentioned, I published the first 6 degrees book then. And the reason it was 6 as opposed to 5 or 7 or any other number was that that was the spread of temperature projections that we might see by 2100 above pre-industrial levels if the climate was allowed to continue warming uncontrollably, at least up to 6. And of course, if we were to cut back on emissions, it might be as low as 1.5 or 2 degrees. And to be honest, given the emission scenarios that the scientists are still working with, 6 degrees is still roughly the upper limit of what we could realistically expect in a worst case scenario by 2100. So it's still relevant to talk about what the impacts would be and what the planet would look like in different places if we get to 2 degrees, 3 degrees, 4 degrees, and like all the way up to 6. And so a lot of people have been emailing me and asking over the years since the original book was published in 2007, what the latest science is, whether the picture was more optimistic or more pessimistic. And I felt really that the only way to address those questions comprehensively was to repeat the exercise of assessing the scientific literature and putting it all together into a chapter by chapter description of what happens at each degree rise. And I think people can make their own minds up really about whether it's an optimistic or a pessimistic result. In some ways, I avoid that question because each chapter stands on its own. And so if you believe that pessimistically we're going to keep on increasing greenhouse gas emissions, burning lots more coal, driving lots more cars, burning oil and so on, and that's going to continue even as far as the end of the century, then you need to read the 5 or 6 degree chapter. If you conversely believe that we are going to honor our pledges to go zero carbon and we're going to hit net zero by mid-century and we're going to very rapidly decarbonize the global economy, then the chapters that are more relevant are 1 degree, 2 degrees, maybe 3 if we're unlucky. So I think the book includes all the different spread of what might happen in response to the different choices that humanity makes about how we manage the planet in terms of our own greenhouse gas emissions. And I hope that's why it's valuable, because it's basically saying if we do this, then this will most likely be the result according to the best science that we have today. Whereas if we take this other choice, then something else will be the result. So it just gives us a window into the future, and we can decide on the basis of that which path we want to take.
Right. Have you ever thought about using ppm, parts per million, instead of degrees Celsius? Because you also talk about the killing curve, the CO2 measurement in the book.
Yes, so ppm in some ways is a better measurement of where we currently are than actual emissions, because it's a measure, of course, of concentration of carbon dioxide in the atmosphere. And if readers are familiar with the Keeling curve, it just goes kind of up and up and up and up and up, and has been, if anything, accelerating in recent years, despite all the actions we've all been taking to try to reduce emissions. Because that's a reflection of the fact that carbon dioxide emissions and other greenhouse gas emissions haven't been reduced in recent years, and it's the concentrations in the atmosphere which are the forcing, which then drives the warming process. So that's the input factor, if you like, whereas the temperature, which I'm talking about, is sort of the output factor, the result of the ppm concentration of carbon dioxide in the atmosphere.
Right. It's interesting that your book was published in 2007. That was when we had the Conference of Parties, COP13, the United Nations Climate Change Conference in Bali, where we were successful with the Bali roadmap. Although the COP15 conference was not successful, but many people ask us, how were you be able to make the COP13 successful in Bali? So that's one thing that we're very proud of. And you published your book in 2007.
Yeah, I attended the Bali conference.
You did.
Yeah. It does seem like an awful long time ago now.
Right.
And I remember the Bali roadmap, and I remember how everyone was suffering sleepless nights to even get to that outcome. So it was like all the COPs, and I've been to many of them, they are not they're not for entertainment. They are really hard work.
Right, but we have the beaches in Bali, so maybe that's one of the factors that made Bali COP13 successful.
I didn't see anyone on a single beach, to be honest. People, you know, yes, they often have COPs in nice locations, but it's really not for people to go and enjoy some rest and recreation. People spend pretty much, well, sometimes it's 24 hours a day stuck inside a conference center or commuting between there and a big hotel on a bus. So trust me, nobody goes to COPs for a holiday, even in a nice location like Bali.
Right. Well, in a review of the book in the New York Review of Books, a review of your latest book, Our Final Warning, Bill McKibben, founder of 350.org, said that you offer, and I quote, a planetary tour of the current carnage, ranging from Greenland to the world's forests to urban areas, end quote. Would you kindly share your creative process on this planetary tour, also on your time travel from 300 million years ago up to the time you finished the book?
Yes, I mean, my first book, which was called High Tide, was a genuine travel book. It was a travel narrative where I went from, you know, Peru to Tuvalu to Alaska and reported on the impacts of global warming that I was seeing. So if that was a travel book, in some ways 6 Degrees is a time travel book, because I'm looking into the future and I'm going and reporting back on the impacts that are now taking place. And so, of course, given that time travel hasn't actually been invented, that involves an element of, well, of creative imagination in terms of actually bringing to life what is there in, you know, the forecasting methods used in computer models or paleoclimate or whatever. So the creative process is kind of unusual in that I'm taking very dry inputs from scientific data and trying to sort of imagine how it would look in the real world, affecting real people. But I could pretty much do the whole thing from behind a desk. So in some ways, it's been a lower carbon journey than the first one I did for High Tide, because I haven't actually had to travel anywhere, and I could do most of the research online now. For the first 6 Degrees, the research I had to actually do in the library in Oxford University, because the journals I was referring were still published physically, and you could still find them on shelves. Now, of course, everything's in PDFs and everything's online that you could want. So it's also much more convenient and much quicker and easier to write science now than it probably was then, and it's more accessible as well. But the challenge always is to make it readable, to make it entertaining to some extent, so it doesn't just become kind of a misery trip, and to make it, you know, a story, a narrative. I mean, every book, even a non-fiction one, has to tell a story. Otherwise, there's no reason for the reader to keep turning the pages. And 6 Degrees does tell a narrative, I guess, because you've got a sort of 1 degrees at the beginning, and you've got 6 Degrees, this sort of catastrophic global event by the end. And hopefully the reader's interested in finding out what that would look like, even if it's only to, you know, inform us better on how to avoid it.
But there are so many locations impacted by climate change. How did you pick some locations? Because the one that you picked really are those who, you know, should be in the attention of many people. How did you pick the location you focused on?
Well, yes, of course. I mean, it's not just some locations that are affected, but the whole planet is affected the whole time by this, by definition. But different locations feature different kinds of impacts. And so, whereas if you're in the high Arctic, you might be seeing the disappearance of, or the melting of permafrost and the dramatic impacts that would have on the landscape. Or even on the Arctic Ocean, you might be seeing the last bit of sea ice melting away, perhaps in the year 2035, in a 2 degree scenario. If you're higher up the scale and you're in 4 degrees, you'd probably have no permafrost left in the Arctic, and you'd have really severe accelerating feedbacks. And whereas even in the very low early stages of climate change, so the 1 degree chapter of what we're currently seeing, you see the very sad disappearance of most of the world's tropical coral reefs. And so some of these impacts we're seeing unfolding, of course, in the world around us, sometimes earlier and more tragically than I imagined in the first 2007 book. You know, the rates of tropical coral bleaching that we're seeing now almost on an annual basis in tropical reefs. You know, I was probably imagining for, you know, sometime like the 2030s in a 2 degrees scenario, but it's now become pretty clear that you won't see any survival of natural coral reefs if we cross the 2 degree threshold, at least no meaningful reefs of any substantial size. And so I think that's probably one of the clearest examples of how the impetus to limit warming to 1.5 is clearly justified by the science, certainly in terms of the planet's biology.
I watched the National Geographic documentary that referred to your book, and it has really compelling visuals, scary. Do you have plan, or maybe TV channels have planned to make a documentary based on this book, on our final warning?
Well, I can tell you there's nothing in production right now. I mean, I get inquiries from time to time, but the 2008 National Geographic documentary is still being shown. It's interesting, actually. It's quite, you know, it was fairly early CGI, so to me it looks it looks dated somewhat. So I would be certainly interested in doing an update, but that's not up to me. It depends on a TV company or producer deciding that's something that they want to do. And I think actually it would be probably a lot better now if there were a budget to do proper CGI. I don't know how much it actually costs, but given that we're talking about, you know, imaginary future scenarios, it would be a lot easier to bring them to life now, you know, using green screen or whatever than it would have been then. So yeah, I think it's a story that still does need telling.
Mm-hmm. I read that you were born in Fiji, grew up in Peru, Spain, and the UK. Did your upbringing make you more sensitive to give voice to the voiceless that are suffering and will eventually be the victims of climate disasters?
I'm not sure I would claim the mantle of being the voice for the voiceless, but I guess having quite a varied childhood. So yes, I was born in Fiji and spent my early like primary school years in Peru, as well as back in the UK and also in Spain, because my parents were traveling quite a lot. My father was a geologist, in fact, so for Fiji and Peru was on overseas postings. It's a different kind of experience from being in one place. It doesn't necessarily make you a happier child because you're always moving schools and losing friends and stuff, but I guess it gives you more of a kind of a global perspective. You know, I end up speaking another language, and you know, I've got, you know, I used to know more about the Incas than I knew about the kings and queens of England when I was like 10 years old, which is probably quite unusual. You know, and I'd seen the high Andes and the impression of really high mountains and the kind of the geographical amazing, extraordinary nature of that sort of Peru is an incredible place because you've got the coastal hyper-arid desert, the Atacama Desert, then you've got the high Andes with the glaciers and the snow and ice, and then you go right down to the Amazon, to the jungle, all in one country, all in about 300 kilometers of sort of cross section. You know, in the UK, I mean, I love England, and I'm currently on the borders of Wales, and it's beautiful and I love it, but not quite the same. So seeing more of the Earth's environment close up, I suppose, was a motivator for me.
So were you at the COP in Lima as well?
Sorry, what?
There was a COP in Lima, Peru. I don't remember when was it. 2014, I believe.
There was a COP in. No, and I missed that one, much to my sadness, because it would have been great to go back to Peru, and I would have been would have found it difficult to resist another quick trip to Machu Picchu or Huaraz or some of the spectacular locations that Peru has on offer. I mean, I will go back at some point, but having a climate-related excuse is always a good idea.
Yeah, that was a good one. We know that climate change is a global environmental problem encompassing multidisciplinary subjects as well as involving different level of governance and interest groups. Referring to your book, I'm really impressed. And if you can share, how do you think we should communicate the scientific details emerged from Intergovernmental Panel on Climate Change or IPCC reports, which you read the fine prints. I read somewhere that you read the fine prints, and the political landscape from the negotiating halls of the United Nations Framework Convention on Climate Change, UNFCCC COP, so that there is a synergy on climate actions between state actors and non-state actors. Is it possible?
That was quite a big and broad question. How would you summarize it? How do we make sure that the world's governments listen to the science, perhaps?
Yes, exactly.
The thing is, it's not that the government leaders don't know the science. I mean, I think the awareness is there, and yes, the moral pressure from the likes of Greta Thunberg has, I think, been very, very helpful in kind of focusing minds and adding to the kind of political momentum. But the reality is that decarbonizing the planet, the whole human economy, is a pretty challenging prospect. You know, we have an idea pretty much of what it might look like. We've got clean energy technologies which are either fairly mature now or ready to scale up, or in still some ways in some ones in early development still. But we know it's not impossible, but it's not going to be easy either, and it's not something which is going to happen overnight. And there's a lot of vested interest in the fossil economy. There's a lot of big companies and entire countries which are dependent on drilling oil and digging up and burning coal and gas. So there's always been losers in the climate game, and those have fought very hard against faster action. And you know, all of us depend on economic growth as well, and doing anything which is going to hit the economy or constrain the development prospects of developing countries has always been a complete no-no. You won't find any developing countries which sign up to stay poor. So how the need for growth in developing world and the need for decarbonization globally can be reconciled has always been one of probably the central challenge of the negotiations. So it's more complicated than just saying there's bad guys and good guys, and the bad guys are blocking progress. It's all of us who block progress because we don't want to change our lifestyles that quickly, and we don't want to do anything which sacrifices our prosperity or our material comfort. So, you know, governments have to deal with the political reality. They can't sign up to an incredibly ambitious deal at a COP and then go back home and find themselves unable to implement it because the electorate rejects it and they find themselves losing power. I mean, that happened to some extent in France when you remember the yellow vests movement, when people came out on the streets and more or less blockaded the country because they didn't want to pay more for their petrol. And that was meant to be a carbon tax and stuff. So whatever the political shift is, it does have to have broad popular support, and that's also a challenge. So it's a really, really complicated thing to do, and there's a lot of politics in all directions, which is why governments can't just turn up in Paris or Copenhagen or now in Glasgow and say, yes, we need to save the planet. Here's the deal, sign it and go away again, and then implement it. Because doing that is a huge shift, probably certainly the biggest shift that humanity will have seen since the Industrial Revolution, and that was always going to take time. We're now running out of time if we're going to avoid breaching the 2 degrees trajectory or even higher. So that's really the challenge, that we don't have time to continue doing all of the politics, because the science has now become so clear.
How did it work with President Nasheed in Maldives, if it's not a classified information?
In what sort of context? I mean, President Nasheed as kind of international campaigner, or as president of the country?
President of the country, and your input and your insights for him.
Oh, well, I mean, I was climate advisor, so my advice was limited to that area. But we did kind of formulate a plan to be the world's first carbon neutral country that was announced before Copenhagen, I think, in 2009. And in some ways that shows you the reality that can intrude, because in 2012 there was a coup against President Nasheed, the old forces of sort of autocracy, who actually represent fossil fuels as well. I mean, these are some of the I shouldn't name names, but I mean, there are people who've been getting rich on trading oil who were very sort of involved in that part of the political landscape. And so the carbon neutral plan was thrown out, and President Nasheed was thrown into jail. And so then it became the real challenge became about restoring democracy and getting free elections back, and then trying to put the country back on some kind of an even keel, which fortunately now has happened. So Nasheed's Maldives Democratic Party is now back in power, and has now restarted the process of attaining net zero status, which they're aiming to do within 10 years again. But that's what I mean. You can always sign a piece of paper, you can always make a plan and say we're going to be net zero, but how do you actually do it? Is the politics going to allow that to happen? Are the people going to allow that to happen? Are you still going to be in power? So none of those things, of course, you can know in advance.
That's a good insight, Mark. You talk about Glasgow and COP26 in Glasgow coming in less than a month. What do you see? What do you expect? Do you have a role there? Will you talk to people?
Yeah, so I'll be in Glasgow, hopefully with former President Nasheed. He's now Speaker of the Maldives Parliament, so he still has a very big role in the country, as well as, of course, as former head of state. Sadly, I'm sure you heard, he was subjected to an assassination attempt a few months ago. So he was very lucky to survive that, probably by Islamic radicals within the country. But his life is clearly at risk still, which is it's difficult for me to imagine, because I don't live like that. But it's that has to be top of all of our priorities as well. So I imagine he'll be in Glasgow if we can manage that, and he'll be making the strongest interventions and pushing for the highest ambition that he can. Also, with his other role as ambassador for the Climate Vulnerable Forum, which is an alliance of 48 developing countries who are classed as most climate vulnerable. Includes the Philippines, but it's currently led by Bangladesh, many African countries, and many of the small island states. In fact, I think in total it represents 1.2 billion people. So it's a important group, and Nasheed's role is to speak on behalf of the Climate Vulnerable Forum to urge other countries to raise their ambition in mitigation, so in the extent of their commitments to reduce carbon emissions.
Were you already his advisor when he had this cabinet meeting underwater?
It all happened around the same time, so I think that was all in. Yeah, he only was elected in 2008, so he'd only been in power for a year when that happened. But so he very quickly moved from. I mean, he devoted his whole life. He'd been in and out of jail, suffered torture, solitary confinement. I mean, an incredible personal sacrifice, really, to bring democracy to the country in what was at the time Asia's longest running dictatorship. And so when the free elections were allowed and he won the presidency in 2008, the government quickly realized that restoring democracy was one thing, but ensuring the long-term survival of the country in the face of sea level rise and other threats from climate breakdown was probably more important in the longer term, and something which needed to be focused on. And it's funny, everyone remembers the underwater cabinet meeting. I mean, it was such a clever, wasn't my idea, so I'm not taking credit here. Such a clever stunt, and because it brought symbolically to life what the threat was in a way which really captured the world's attention.
Yeah, people are still using that picture in many presentations.
Yeah, they absolutely are, because and President Nasheed's always been a diver. I mean, he's well accustomed to using scuba gear. This wasn't something he just did for the cameras. And many of the cabinet likewise. I mean, you've got people who are ministers who are engineers, marine biologists, specialists, things like that. So in some ways it wasn't impossible to do, as it might be with getting Boris Johnson or somebody underwater in scuba gear. So and of course it just had that incredible symbolic power. So it was really a brilliant stunt.
Yeah, thank you for that story, Mark. Now, when we talk about climate change, especially now, many people relate it to the pandemics, COVID-19 pandemic. And there are lots of recommendations on green recovery. Even in Indonesia, we also talked about green recovery, green economy. Now, referring to your book, Our Final Warning, 6 Degrees of Climate Emergency, what would be the priorities for green recovery, do you think?
Well, I mean, green recovery means not going back to the dirty pollution that was in evidence everywhere before the pandemic, certainly in developing countries. I mean, you remember when the first lockdowns were happening, that people were saying they could see the sky for the first time ever in Delhi. They could see the Himalayas from far away, and all of a sudden, I think it was recognized just how severe a problem straightforward air pollution is. Not talking about greenhouse gases here, although it is mostly combustion related. But why not have a growth trajectory which brings prosperity to the country and brings development and ends poverty, but which doesn't mean you have to pollute the rivers, kill all the species, fill the whole sea with plastic, turn the sky brown, and everything else. So it's not impossible. There's not some law of economic law or law of physics or thermodynamics which states that development must always be dirty. We have the technologies, and many of the technologies now are cheaper than the alternatives. And so, for us at the Climate Vulnerable Forum, we're actually trying to get this properly thought through. And so the concept is called climate prosperity plans. And so Bangladesh, which is the chair of the Climate Vulnerable Forum, has more or less just completed its climate prosperity plan, which means really putting together a plan for how you deliver economic growth and increases in energy for, these countries have very, very low levels of energy consumptions compared to developed countries, of course. So how do you deliver the increased energy without burning more coal, without burning more oil, without burning more gas? So what do we need? We need renewables, we need other clean energy sources, we need hydrogen, and so on. And so putting that together into a plan, which then becomes the sort of central part of government policy, is something that the CVF is trying to assist all of its members to do. So the Maldives will be doing one, and I think at the latest regional meeting in Asia, there was 10 or 15 more countries who also want to carry out this kind of process. So I think a lot of governments now are beginning, well, not just beginning, but clearly understand that development must proceed in a clean direction. They don't want to end up where China is now, where you've got, okay, you're beyond middle income, you're attaining high levels of GDP, but you're completely dependent on huge amounts of coal burning and other fossil fuels. So how to achieve prosperity at the same time as moving the planet to net zero is the central challenge. And I think the more that money, green recovery money post-COVID is put into that and to the investment that it requires, the better, and the more likely we are to meet the kind of the targets that were agreed in Paris, of course, of 1.5 or at worst 2 degrees.
So this green recovery, green economy, those terms remind me of Greta Thunberg's speech on, the blah, blah, blah thing. How would you talk to the younger generation about this issue? We know that in the Youth Climate Summit in New York, I believe it was 2 years ago or 1 year ago, the UN Secretary General became the keynote listener rather than keynote speaker. So he listened to the aspirations of the young delegates. Now, how would you talk to them?
Well, I mean, I do talk to the younger generation about climate change. So my daughter was one of the climate strikers. She's 14 now, and
cool.
Yeah, I'll send you the pictures of them of when they did their school strike in our local town. The speeches that they made. I mean, it was wonderful to see them taking an interest and taking a responsibility in their own future and demanding that the adult demographic do likewise. But you've got to have a plan. I mean, it's fine for Greta to complain about blah blah blah, but you've got to not yourself do blah blah blah. You've got to have a plan and say, okay, this is what I actually want. What do I want? Do I want 70% solar electricity? Do I want 100%? Do I want 30%? Do I want nuclear? Do I not want nuclear? Do I want hydrogen? How are we going to run planes? How are we going to run cars? Do we have to stop flying? Whatever. You have to have a plan, and the plan has to be something which isn't just based on fantasy and kind of magical thinking like a lot of the time these things are. So it's fine to demand the impossible if you're an activist, but once you get into the level of actually working with governments and government leaders, you have to focus on what's realistic. I mean, it can and should be ambitious, but it also has to be something that you can do. Otherwise, you're also guilty of blah blah blah, of saying yes, I will do this impossible thing, and then going home and continuing business as usual. So, I think for me, that's really the key is to have really ambitious policies, but to focus them in a realistic direction. And that's something that we can all challenge ourselves with, I think.
Yeah, we have to give them some really space, training, and mentoring. I would like you to go a little bit more on that. When you talk to them, do you talk about the science or the process that they could go to in conveying their messages, or do you have other ways to talk about it?
You mean for the younger climate activists?
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, I mean, I think it's important that they begin to move into asking for realistic outcomes. So I think it's important that they keep the ambition and say, we want to have 1.5 degrees as the absolute upper limit. As I said earlier, that's important for the survival of not just coral reefs but coral atoll nations, and for many other populations and ecosystems as well. But how do we deliver that? I mean, for example, one of the things I've done is to change my mind on nuclear power and say, okay, we need more fission power to generate hydrogen and electricity, and it doesn't generate carbon, and that's something a lot of environmentalists who find very difficult to accept because historically they've been always against nuclear. But in a climate emergency, we have to be realistic, and we have to look at the basics of the challenge ahead of us, and not start from a position of only wanting solutions that meet our kind of I would say psychological, but meet our kind of ideological requirements, I would say, because this is something which involves all the politics, all of the countries, all of the world's population. Ultimately, this transition. So, yes, be ambitious, be loud, be in the face of the politicians, but also be in the position to bring the general public around, because it's the voters, at least in democratic countries, and public opinion more broadly, who will determine whether the politicians are able to deliver even an ambitious outcome. So perhaps focus at home as well on persuading people, whether it's locally with your parents and your schools, or more broadly in the country, that this is something really urgent that we all need to do.
I have a question that may have been addressed to you hundreds of times, probably. What would be your advice for aspiring environmental writers? What steps do they need to take? How can they learn the ropes to be a credible and compassionate knowledge writers?
Well, I mean, embarking on any writing career is tough, and I think you kind of just have to do it, and probably not expected to earn a living wage straight away. I mean, the one good thing about the world that we're living in is there's no barriers. You don't, in the old days when I was growing up, you had the kind of gatekeepers of, like, I don't know, magazine editors or newspaper editors, and you had to pick up the phone and you had to persuade them to run a piece that you'd written. Now, of course, you can publish anything anywhere, which is great, but of course, then you've got just the sheer volume of things being written all the time. And so how do you stand out from the crowd, and how do you make it into a platform where you can get more noticed? So in some ways, I guess it's the same. You have to get the gatekeepers of those platforms to see your stuff, but at least it's easier to write and it's easier to publish. And I'm sure it's easier to break through now with social media. If you've got real talent, then it probably was before, when it was often about who you knew as much as anything, and what your background was. So I think it's probably more democratic now. But like I say, the volume of information and the volume of other people out there who are, shouting all the time is difficult to cut through. But just, I don't know, volunteer, just write, go and observe, start traveling. This is going to be an incredible century that we've got in front of us, and there's going to be a lot for you to say and a lot for you to help other people understand. So just do it, and if you feel that passion, believe in yourself and believe in your skills, because I know a lot of young people who frankly don't quite know what they want to do. They're sort of doing university, but they don't know what they want to do afterwards, and So if you've got something which you do feel passionate about and which you want to work on and put time and energy into, then do it. Chase your dreams, because you're only young once, and there's no better time.
I'll memorize that, although I'm not that young.
Nor me.
I have a weekly column on environment and climate change, so I'll pretend that I'm still young. Lastly, although we are not talking about a novel here, would you care to read aloud one page or maybe one or two paragraphs of the book inside your book that you think is the most important to reflect upon?
So fortunately you gave me advanced knowledge of this, so I don't have to just flick through the book and go which bit is worth reading. But actually there's a paragraph in the forward here, which I think Bill McKibben referred to as well in his New York Review of Books piece, where I say, if we stay on the current business as usual trajectory, we could see 2 degrees as early as the 2030s, 3 degrees around mid-century, and 4 degrees by 2075 or so. If we're unlucky with positive feedbacks from thawing permafrost in the Arctic or collapsing tropical rainforests, then we could be in for 5 or even 6 degrees by the century's end. On the other hand, if politicians make serious and determined efforts to implement the Paris targets, with the United States coming back into the fold as part of that effort, we can still hold off 2 degrees until the latter part of the century and stop 3 degrees or higher temperature rises from ever happening at all. And I won't read this out, but at the end of the book, I talk about how, as a kind of a final bit of philosophy really, that it's important just that it's never going to be too late, that even if we do cross 2 degrees, I don't think we'll ever say it's too late now, we give up. So I don't think it's ever a point where you can become fatalistic. I think it's really important to continue fighting and to believe that there can be a future for our children, which is, you know, one where they can flourish in an incredible and beautiful planetary environment. And that's something that we'll have to go on fighting for a long time yet, but it's never going to be something which is entirely foreclosed. There will always be hope, and we should always act as if we can continue to be hopeful.
Thank you so much, Mark. Let's all give a big round of our warmest virtual applause for our distinguished author. Thank you all for supporting the Yayasan Mudra Swari Saraswati Patrons Program, and to the festival's partners who made the Ubud Writers and Readers Festival possible. Follow at Ubud Writers Festival on Instagram, Twitter, and Facebook, or visit ubudwritersfestival.com for more information about the program.